Good morning, children. We learned about aestivation in the previous class. What is meant by aestivation, Alandina? How do you define it?
The mode of arrangement of petals and sepals with respect to the other member of whorls.
Okay. What is meant by imbricate aestivation? Devi, what is imbricate aestivation? Many of your videos are still not turned on. Yes, Devi? Imbricate.
If the margins of sepals or petals overlaps one another, but in only a particular direction, it is known as imbricate.
Okay. And twisted aestivation, Lakshmi?
When the sepals or the petals that overlap with the next one and so on.
Once again?
If the petals or sepals that
Specify
overlap.
how many margins are getting overlapped. When one
appendage overlaps
when one margin of the petal or sepal, just check and tell me.
If one margin of the appendages overlaps the next one and so on.
That is known as twisted aestivation. And vexillary or papillonaceous, Adityadev?
There are 5 sepals. The standard one overlap the wings, and the
wings will overlap
the keel.
How many petals? 5. Standard one, how many standard petals are there?
2 standard ones.
2.
2.
And wings, how many?
2 wings.
2 keel and 1?
2 keel, 1 large one.
Which is the largest one? Standard. The largest one is standard, smallest one are the keel. Okay. And now we are going to learn about the other parts, already petals and sepals. The 2 whorls we already discussed, and we are going to learn in detail about the remaining 2 whorls, NDROECIUM and GYNOECIUM. As you know, NDROECIUM is the male part of the flower, which consists of stamens, and GYNOECIUM is the female part, which consists of carpel. Children, turn your videos on. Don't make me repeat it. NDROECIUM is the male reproductive part, and it consists of stamens. And the number of stamens can be different for different flowers. And in each stamen, there will be a filament and an anther. You can classify or you can divide stamen into 2 parts. Anther, a lobed structure at the tip, you call it as anther. Then there is filament, a stalk-like structure known as filament. Anther is usually bilobed. What you see here, see, these are the lobes. So usually they will be bilobed, 2 lobes, but the number of lobes can differ depending upon the flower. Each lobe, inside each lobe, there will be 2 chambers. So if you examine each lobe, there will be 2 chambers inside it, and these chambers are known as pollen sacs. Inside these pollen sacs, pollen grains will be present. I'll repeat once again. NDROECIUM is the male part of the flower, and it consists of stamens. Stamen has got 2 parts, anther and filament. Filament is a stalk-like structure, whereas anther is a lobed structure present at the tip. 2 lobes, usually they are bilobed. There can be changes, but generally they are having 2 lobes. And inside each lobe, there will be 2 chambers. And these chambers are known as pollen sacs. Inside anther, lobes are there, or anther is made up of lobes. Inside each lobe, there will be sac, which you call as pollen sac. Inside each pollen sac, pollen grains. They are filled with pollen grains, and each pollen grain has got 2 male gametes. Sterile stamen is called a staminode. Sterile, which are not capable of carrying out fertilization. We call such a stamen as sterile stamen. Sterile, fertile and sterile. Sterile means which is not fertile. And such stamens which cannot produce these male gametes to carry out fertilization, you call it a staminode. What is a staminode? Sterile stamen is known as a staminode. Once again, the male reproductive part is known as male reproductive part is known as androecium. Androecium consists of stamens, and each stamen has got 2 parts, a lobed structure at the tip known as anther and a stalk. And this anther, usually it will be bilobed structure, and inside each lobe, there will be 2 chambers, and these chambers are known as pollen sacs, and inside each pollen sac there will be several or so many pollen grains. Each pollen grain has got 2 male gametes, and there are certain stamens which cannot carry out fertilization, cannot produce male gametes. So such stamens you call as staminodes. Now moving on to the classification of stamen. This we had seen last class. Classification of stamens based on attachment, where they are attached. Accordingly, you can categorize stamens into 2 types, epipetalous and epiphyllous. Depending upon its attachment, you can categorize it into epipetalous and epiphyllous. That is one mode of classification. One more classification is there based on whether they are attached or not. And the first classification is based on where they are attached. Where they are attached. And this second classification, that is also based on attachment, and it depends upon whether they are attached, whether they are united or free. And the first classification into epipetalous and epiphyllous. Epipetalous means here the stamens will be attached to petals. When they are attached to petals, as you can see in the figure, epipetalous. Epipetalous means they are attached to petals. Stamen you can see very closely associated with the petals. And if it is attached to the perianth, then you can call it as epiphyllous. Perianth, you call when flowers or when in a flower, when petals and sepals are not distinct from each other, when you cannot distinguish between both, you call it as perianth. So it can be even attached to perianth. Lily is an example. Then you call it as epiphyllous. Epipetalous means stamens, when they are attached to the petals, you call it as epipetalous. Example, brinjal. And when they are attached to perianth, you call it as epiphyllous. Lily is an example. Perianth is when petals and sepals are not distinct from one another. You call it as perianth. Then, depending upon whether they are free or whether they are united, whether they are joined together to form bundles, or whether each one is free, you can classify them into polyandrous and united. Polyandrous means they will be free. The stamens will not form any bundles. They will be free. Each one will be free. Whereas in certain other cases, these stamens will be united and they form a bundle. And the number of bundles, depending upon the number of bundles they form, you can classify into monadelphous, diadelphous, polyadelphous. As the name suggests, mono, one, di, two, poly, several. So monadelphous means stamens will form just one bundle, as in the case of China rose. You can see the pictures. And then when they form 2 bundles, then you can call it as 9 plus 1. 9 in one bundle and 1 in the other bundle. So that is diadelphous. Then when they form many bundles, polyadelphous, in citrus flowers, you can find this condition. So once again, androecium can be classified on the basis of its attachment. If they are attached to the petals, it is epipetalous. If they are attached to the perianth, epiphyllous. And these stamens can be either free or united to form bundles. When they are united to form bundles, depending upon the number of bundles they form, you can categorize it into monadelphous, forming one bundle, diadelphous, two bundles, polyadelphous, more than two. Now moving on to the next slide. Same that pictures, once again it is shown, polyandrous and synandrous. Polyandrous, when the stamens are free, each stamen is free. You can see in the case of lotus, the stamens are not united to form any bundles, or they all are free. Whereas they are forming one bundle in the case of China rose. Synandrous, polyandrous and synandrous. The synandrous term is not there in your textbook, so you need not learn. Polyandrous means the stamens are free. Synandrous means stamens are united. And synandrous is further classified into monadelphous, diadelphous, and polyadelphous. Okay. Now moving on to gynoecium. So we have completed androecium. Next is about gynoecium. Gynoecium is a female part of the flower, female reproductive part of the flower, and it consists of carpels or pistil. And number of pistils can also be different for different flowers. It can be one or it can be many. So the number of carpels present in a flower also differs from flower to flower. And carpel has got three main parts. This you had learned from class 7. Style, stigma, ovary, inside ovary, ovule. So stigma is the sticky tip. The sticky part at the tip, you call it as stigma. Stigma is the sticky part at the tip. Then we have an elongated style, and style connects stigma to the ovary. Next we have ovary, that is the enlarged basal portion. It is the, just a minute. The enlarged basal portion is known as ovary. On this ovary, style lies. Means style is attached to ovary. And stigma, I told it's sticky because stigma has to be sticky. Only then the pollen grains can stick onto that to bring about pollination. You know that pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma. So that is why it is said it is receptive surface. It's on the stigma that the pollen grains fall. They stick to that and later they will germinate and produce a pollen tube carrying the male gametes to the egg cell. This you had learned in class 10. Once again, gynoecium is the female reproductive part. It's made up of carpels or pistils. If you take each carpel, you can find different parts. Style. Style is the part which is connecting stigma to the ovary. That elongated part, that is style. Whereas stigma is a sticky end at the tip. It receives pollen grains. It is a receptive surface of pollen grains, and pollen grains are germinating on the stigma to form a pollen tube. And it leads into, or style leads into, an enlarged basal portion on which style lies. In that way also you can say, because it is attached to the ovary, that we can see the style. Each ovary, so inside each ovary, there will be one or more ovules. The number of ovules also will be different for different flowers. Sometimes it can be one, it can be many. So that depending upon, and there are, you will be learning about that later. Each ovary consists of one or more ovules, and these ovules are attached to placenta. You have learned about placenta in human females, in pregnant females. So similarly, here also they have a placenta. You'll be learning about different types of placentation. A placenta is a cushion-like structure, and the ovules will be attached to this placenta inside the ovary. Inside the ovary, ovule is present, and the number of ovules can be different for different flowers. There can be one or many ovules, and these ovules are attached to a cushion-like structure. You call it as placenta. Okay, hope you have understood. And once fertilization is completed, and you know in fertilization, the pollen grains, it will land on the, you know what is meant by pollination? Transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma. Once it lands on the stigma, if the pollen grains are compatible, means if it is matching, you cannot say that any pollen grain is falling on the stigma or pollen grains belonging to entirely different or flower from an entirely different species, then it will not germinate. So there are some chemical interactions between the stigma and pollen grain, only compatible, only matching or related species of the pollen grain from a related or of the same kind only can germinate on the stigma. Upon germinating, they'll produce a pollen tube. This pollen tube will grow towards the, or this pollen tube grows towards the ovary, enters the ovule. Inside the ovule, we have embryo sac. I don't know whether you have learned about embryo sac. Inside the embryo sac, egg cell will be present. Egg cell is a female gamete, and it will fuse with the female gamete. Two male gametes are there. One of them will fuse with the female gamete, and it will result in the formation of a zygote. Zygote develops into embryo, and once fertilization is completed, ovary becomes fruit, ovule becomes seed. So sometimes you get confused and you write ovule will become a fruit and ovary becomes a seed. It's not like that. Ovary is present outside. Ovule is inside that. So fruit, ovule inside, or ovule will change into seed. Ovary becomes fruit once fertilization is completed. Last year you had learned in class 10, you had learned about fertilization, double fertilization taking place in flowering plants. And there we learned each pollen grain is having two male gametes, and one of them will, these pollen grains are passing through the pollen tube, reaching the ovary. Inside the ovary, ovule. Inside the ovule, there is embryo sac, where along with egg cell, many other structures are present. And one of the male gamete will fuse with this egg cell and forms a zygote. Zygote will change into embryo, and this embryo gradually will develop into a new individual or new plant or a new seedling later. But once fertilization is completed, ovary becomes fruit, ovule becomes seed. I'm not going into the details of the double fertilization taking place in these flowering plants, because next year you will learn all those in detail. So what you need to understand is, once fertilization is completed, ovules change into seeds and ovary will transform into fruit. And now we are going to see the types of gynoecium, how to classify these gynoecium. And I told gynoecium consists of carpels or pistils. And the number of carpels or pistils, that can also be different. Sometimes it will be one, and in some there can be many. So polycarpellary, when more than one carpels are present, you can classify them into apocarpus and syncarpus. Apocarpus and syncarpus. Apocarpus means many carpels are present, and these carpels, each carpel will be free. They are not joined together. Whereas syncarpus, remember syngamy, fusion, syncarpus, carpels are fused together. Example, mustard and tomato, you can find they have different, many pistils, and these pistils are joined together. Whereas in lotus and rose, many pistils are there and these are free. Okay, children, are you getting confused with the terms? Apocarpus, carpus, carpel, apo, free. Syngamy, you know, fusion. Syncarpus, Carpels are fused. The number of carpels present in gynoecium can be 1 to many. If many are there, either it will be fused or it will be free. If they are fused, they are joined, you call it as syncarpous pistil. And if they are free, you call it as apocarpous pistil. And examples for apocarpous pistil or apocarpous carpel, lotus and rose, syncarpous, mustard and tomato. Okay, before we see the placentation, any slide would you like to see, children? Any of the slides? Any slide you want to see once again? Have you understood? Any terms? Epipetalous, epiphyllous, polyandrous, synandrous. And I'm saying the terms, are you getting it? Epipetalous. Try to recollect what is epipetalous. Epiphyllous. Okay? Epipetalous and epiphyllous. Synandrous. Androus. Syn. Fused. Synandrous. Polyandrous. Okay? And when it is synandrous, you can classify it into monadelphous, diadelphous, polyadelphous. Are you getting the terms? What is meant by mona, dia? Okay. Then we learned staminode. Try to see, try to recollect whether you are getting it. Staminode. Okay. Sterile stamens. Then apocarpus, syncarpus. Then style, stigma, ovary, ovule, all that you have learned. Okay. So can we have a quick recap? Then I will proceed with placentation. Any doubts, any point would you like to see? You can tell me. If you want to see, you can tell me. If not, I will see the recap now. Nobody is having any doubt. Let me check. All your videos are on now. If anybody is having any genuine problem, please let me know. Okay. So we started with androecium. What is meant by androecium, or what makes up androecium, Sanjana?
Male reproductive part consists of stamen.
Stamen. Aditya Dev, what are the different parts of a stamen?
Anther and pistil.
Anther and?
Pistil.
Inside the bulb we have something. No, what is that? Huh? What is there inside the bulb? What do you call it? Huh?
I forgot the name.
Jyogi, what is that?
Filament.
Filament. And what else you know about anther, Jyoti? What else I told about anther other than that? Anther is usually
bilobed. It is made of 2 chambers, pollen
What is made up of 2 chambers? Each lobe is made up of each lobe. It has got 2 lobes. Each lobe is made up of
pollen.
Made up of or consists of
2 chambers.
2 chambers. What do you call these chambers?
Pollen sacs.
Inside the pollen sac?
Pollen grains.
Inside each pollen grain?
Stamina.
Inside each pollen grain?
Pollen.
For fertilization, what should be there inside?
Pollen.
What is the significance of pollen grains, dear?
Male gametes.
It consists of 2 male gametes. Okay, then we learned about the classification of androecium based on its attachment. How can you classify epipetalous and epiphyllous stamen, Gaya?
Stamens that are attached to the petals are called epipetalous, and those attached to the sepals. What?
Perian. You call it as?
Epiphyllous.
Phyllis. What is the difference between Monadelphous and diadelphous stamen. Nimida?
Monodelphous is one bundle, and then
They join to form one bundle.
in diadelphous two bundles.
Two bundles. For polyadelphous stamen, can you give me an example, Malaviga? Polyadelphous stamens forming several bundles. One example. Malaviga, Vibin. Mute. In which flower you can see stamens forming several bundles?
Citrus plants.
Citrus flowers, you can find stamens forming several bundles. Then style, stigma, ovary and all, I'm not asking. I hope you know all that. And what happens to this ovary and ovule after fertilization and Liz? Once fertilization is completed, what are the changes taking place in the flower?
Ovules will develop into seeds and ovary will change into seeds.
Once again.
Ovules into seeds and ovary.
This is what I said. When I explained also, I told no, you used to have some confusion. Ovary is outside, ovule inside. So seed cannot be outside the fruit. No, seeds will be inside the fruit. So ovary will become fruit, ovule will become seed, and all the other parts. Once fertilization is completed, all the other parts will wither off. It will shrivel and it will fall off. But these parts will remain and undergo transformation. And then what else we learned? Only that. What was the next point? That okay, difference between apocarpus and syncarpus. Meherin, not Meherin. Wait, Emilyn, distinguish between apocarpus and syncarpus.
Apocarpus, the carpus will be free, but in syncarpus, the carpus will be fused.
Fused together. Okay. So can we continue? Now next we are going to learn about placentation. So that is the arrangement. Or placentation deals with the arrangement of ovules or seeds on the placenta. Placentation, it deals with the arrangement of ovules. Ovules are getting changed to seeds later and they'll be attached to the placenta within the ovary. So arrangement of ovules within the ovary is known as placentation. And there are different types of placentation. This is also very important topic. Either you can be given a picture. A picture will be given. You'll be asked to identify the type of placentation. Or else a particular flower or a particular plant can be mentioned and you have to write what type of placentation is found in that particular flower. So you should be familiar with the examples, the types of placentation, the names of placentation, and pictures also. You don't have to learn to draw, but you should have an idea. Seeing the picture, you should be able to identify the type of placentation. Marginal placentation. Marginal, basal, axile, free central, and parietal. These are the 5 types of placentation. Marginal, basal, axile, free central, and parietal placentation. Once again, we'll see all the 5: marginal, basal, axile, free central, and finally parietal placentation. And we'll see each one in detail. We'll start with the first one, marginal. Marginal placentation. In marginal placentation, placenta will form a ridge, an elevated part, as you can see in the figure 920. No? In marginal placentation, the placenta forms a ridge along the ventral suture of the ovary and the ovules are borne on this ridge forming 2 rows. Once again, so as you can see in the figure, The placenta, it is forming a ridge. They form a ridge like this, and along the ventral opening or the ventral suture of the ovary. So along the ventral, dorsal and ventral side, along the ventral opening, you can find a ridge, placenta forming a ridge, and to this ridge, ovules are attached. Example is P, and it forms 2 rows. So if you see, this is one row, this is a second row. In 2 rows, these are arranged. Once again, in marginal placentation, the placenta will be forming a ridge. And since it is in the margin, since the ovules are arranged in the margin, you call it as marginal placentation. So the placenta is forming a ridge along the ventral suture of the ovary, and there you can find ovules arranged in 2 rows. Example P. Once again, the first one is marginal placentation. In marginal placentation, you can find placenta forming a ridge where along the ventral opening or ventral suture of the ovary, and there you can see ovules are attached to this placenta in 2 rows. A typical example for marginal placentation is pea plant, or in peas, or here in the ovary of pea, you can see ovules are arranged in this particular pattern, that is by marginal placentation. So marginal placentation means placenta forms a ridge along the ventral suture of the ovary, and there you can find in 2 rows the arrangement of ovules. Rest we will continue in the next class. I'll take your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you, children. See you next class.
Thank you.